Hey there, folks. This week I'm recreating a pixel art animation that I made in a high school computer programming course 19 years ago. Last week I saw a new subscriber, Ryan Reku, leave I think that's how you pronounce that. He left a couple comments talking about fooling around in Paint back on his parents' old Windows 98 computer, and that got me thinking about this computer programming course I took back in 2001. A few months ago, another subscriber, the Oblivious Marshmallow, I think it was, asked me when I started creating art in MS Paint. And yeah, that's a complicated question. I mean, like Ryan, I was fooling around in Paint since I was a kid. I mean, first in Paintbrush, then in Paint 95. When I was a freshman in high school, I think I used MS Paint to draw some maps for an RPG my friend and I were working on. However, when I think of the first time I really drew anything of any kind of artistic significance and quality in Paint, I think it all started in this computer programming course. Now, you may be thinking that programming and Paint have nothing in common, but hang in there. This is going to be a long story, and in the end, I promise everything will be explained. Not everything, but I mean, regarding the video. Anyways, I don't want to brag here, but I've always been a little bit gifted when it comes to computers. Back in 1996, when I was in 6th grade, I taught myself how to write HTML, and I even dabbled a bit in JavaScript. And come to think of it, I think I might have used MS Paint back then to create a star field for my Star Wars fan site on GeoCities back then, but that doesn't really count. Anyway, in 1999, I was a freshman in high school, and I was desperate to take some easy classes that wouldn't have any homework. When I saw computer programming courses available, I jumped at the opportunity. You can't take a computer home to do programming at home, so yeah, no homework in that class. In the course, we learned Quick Basic, or QBasic, which was already obsolete as it predated Windows, but it was where our school started us. Our teacher, Miss Tempest, was a tyrant straight out of Texas. If our work was done, we were expected to sit there staring at this relatively simple code and double, triple, quadruple checking it for errors, even after we were done working on it and we had everything going and working just fine. Until everybody else finished. No talking, no note passing. I don't even think we were allowed to turn our heads more than 5 degrees, which she would then interpret as cheating. And if she thought you were cheating, you got an instant 0 on the assignment. Which eventually happened to me. Now, I confess, I wasn't above cheating when I needed to in high school. I had written extremely tiny German vocab words on a scrap piece of paper too small to be suspicious. I glanced over at classmates' geometry tests when I could. For all the good that did me, I still barely passed. Anyway, the important thing here though is that I only cheated when I needed to because I didn't prepare or just had a lousy teacher and had no idea what I was doing even when I tried to prepare. This programming course was so stupid easy that it was painful. I didn't need to cheat, and I didn't cheat. Cheating would have been more work, and why would I want more work for myself? Anyway, when I got the assignment back with a big Texas-sized 0 on it with a note, "See me after class," I thought I must have turned in the wrong assignment or just totally misunderstood what the assignment was. And to be fair, I was so bored in that class that I barely paid attention. So I did as the note said. I went to go see her after class, and so did another student, who I knew to be a fairly good, if not straight A student himself. She then tore us new buttholes for cheating, and when we protested, she said our code was exactly the same, which in all of her years of teaching this course, I don't know how long that was, but it had never happened unless someone was cheating. And to be fair, she did state this rule on the first day of class, that if any of us had exactly the same code, she would know that we were cheating. It was one of her many, many, many rules about cheating. But here's the thing. We sat with our backs to each other on opposite ends of the room. This was before cell phones and text messaging and instant messaging, not to mention that we didn't have Windows on these computers, so we were limited only to MS-DOS and what we could create in QBasic. Now, I pleaded my case that there were only 2 ways that we could have cheated. First was that one of us would have had to have taken the time to write the code out by hand on paper and then pass it as a note through more than half of the students in the room, any one of which might have cried foul because if they got caught with that note, they would get a 0 on that test too. And then the other one would have to then open the note, type it out exactly the same as it was written without her noticing it. The other possibility, and the one that I argued was more plausible, was that one of us was possessed by a demon. They rotated their heads 180 degrees exorcist style, and then used their perfect demonic vision and photographic memory to capture everything on the other student's screen, again, without ever noticing it. Anyway, she didn't much care for my sarcasm. We were both given detention. Well, I was furious, and if you want to piss me off, accuse me of something I didn't do. Well, I went home that afternoon and I immediately told my mother that I needed her to drive me to school on Saturday for detention because my psychotic teacher was accusing me of cheating. Well, the next day came along and I'm mostly over it at this point. I'd spent the past 24 hours cursing this woman to my friends, my girlfriend, and just about anyone who would listen. Then fifth period rolls along and I walk into Miss Tempest's classroom and immediately I freeze in horror. It's every 14-year-old high school student's worst nightmare. My mom is there. I'm mortified. I am beyond mortified. Words cannot do this feeling justice. I don't even think I acknowledged her. I just walked in, sat down in front of my computer, and started working on the next assignment. I couldn't really hear what they were talking about, but a few minutes after class was supposed to start, my mom finally walked out, and Miss Tempest then proceeded to tell us how to do the next assignment, which I was already halfway done with. When she finished her lecture, as everyone was starting, she then walked up to me, gave me back my test. This time it was marked with 100, and she whispered, "Don't worry about Saturday." Now, you know, I have another video I want to do where I talk about this a little bit more, but I gave my mom a ton of grief growing up. And I'm sure it's only natural for teenagers to feel embarrassed by their parents, but my mom always had my back. I got really lucky to have such an awesome mom. I just didn't realize it until I grew up. Anyway, around this time, I was thinking that I wanted to go to art school. However, later that semester, my art teacher took us to a school field trip in the Art Institute in the American Art Academy in Chicago. And at some point, I asked the forbidden question: how much is tuition? And the answer was north of $100,000. Nope! Nope, 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 no. This was a really valuable trip for me because I realized two things. First, I realized that if I was going to be the kind of artist that excelled at a program like this, that I need to start using heroin and tripping like daily. And yeah, not only do I hate drugs, I hate needles even more. Second, I realized that if I did this, I'd be a starving broke artist, and I convinced myself that I needed to change my plans a little bit. I decided to instead focus on computer animation. CGI was all the rage in 1999, and there was a huge demand for anyone who could model anything in 3D. Unfortunately, my advisor was an idiot who had no idea what CGI was. He signed me up for a plethora of regular art courses, which I still enjoyed, but it wasn't what I wanted to learn. And of course, more programming courses, because supposedly Programming 3 focused on the principles of animation, which I was skeptical about, but whatever, I'll take it. Now, my school actually did offer CAD courses, including one that taught 3D Studio Max, which was exactly what I wanted to learn, but I didn't find out about that until the last semester of my junior year. Anyway, I took Programming 2 my sophomore year, which taught us Visual Basic, which was a bit more relevant than QBasic, and again, Miss Tempest was a complete tyrant, but I played by her rules and aced the class without any problems. And since this was a Windows thing, we had access to Minesweeper on the computers, and that made the class more bearable as I was able to spend all my free time mastering Minesweeper, and I am an expert at Minesweeper today. Anyway, all I really remember about this class is Minesweeper, to tell you the truth. I still know Visual Basic well enough to be competent in VB.net, which I still use on occasion when I needed to at my last job, developing some automation tools, but yeah, really it's Minesweeper I remember from this. I'm not sure why, but I didn't take Programming 3 my junior year. There might have been some sort of class prerequisite I had to take, or maybe it conflicted with another art class, but at the end of my junior year, I stumbled into my first CAD course, and finally, after 2 years, I found the courses that I wanted to take. I canceled my other classes and completely replanned my entire senior year around CAD. I actually still have nightmares that I didn't properly cancel my international law class because I was a week into it when I switched into another CAD course. Anyway, one of the few courses that I didn't cancel my first semester of my senior year was Programming 3. Not because I was dying to take it, but because I think it overlapped with one of my basic CAD courses that I had already taken. Again, Miss Tempest was teaching the course, and for the life of me, I cannot remember the name of the software or code we were using. Probably because it wasn't hugely popular, and partially because it was late 2001, so my memory of this is a bit vague after all these years. But essentially, we were creating sprites in the Windows 98 version of MS Paint and animating them by writing code. I think it was most comparable to a Flash animation that we had to program ourselves. Now, at this point, everybody in the room had Miss Tempest at least 2 times before. She also taught typing 1 and 2, which there was no amount of money in the world you could have paid me to take. As I recall, she had a reputation for being as much of a tyrant in those classes as she did in our programming courses. But here's the thing. She actually softened up quite a bit for this course. I suspect that if we had been with her for 2 or more courses at this point, she knew that everyone in the room actually wanted to be there, or at least learn what she was presenting us. So the first 2 weeks of the class were literally an introduction to MS Paint, which this was probably how I learned how to master the curve tool, which is by far the most important tool in creating my unique artistic style in pixel art. I also remember her saying that if you try to type in a text box and you can't, it's probably because you're using the selection box instead of the text box. And I remember saying under my breath, just loud enough that I was a little bit worried that she might have heard me, of like, how stupid do you have to be to do that? And in the 19 years since then, I've actually done it exactly 4 times. I keep track of it now. I am that stupid from time to time, and every time I kind of laugh a little bit. Anyway, this was the first class where I really learned how to master MS Paint. I think the low resolution sprites, which were only about half as big as the sprites I'm creating here, only had like 1 black pixel dot for their eyes, and that would eventually evolve into my comic characters of today. And this class was great. It was the first time I'd really been given the freedom to tell a story through my art using animation. And granted, we were limited to only a loop of a few seconds, but I had been introduced to an entirely new way of creating art and expressing myself. Unlike the previous programming courses, which were formatted to make us write code that would accomplish various tasks in a very regimented way, create a calculator that will print the number of days a person has been alive in this format, or create a program that will group these numbers based on factor X and add them accordingly. These were the kind of things that we had to do, and it was all just very regimented. There's a right way to do it, and everything else was wrong. This course gave us the freedom to use the principles of the code we were learning and then create something unique with what we had learned. Miss Tempest taught us enough to accomplish each assignment, but for me, I had a new artistic medium, and I was going to apply what we were learning in ways that went beyond just the simple assignment parameters. And I think it was for this reason that Miss Tempest finally took an interest in me as a student. I mean, yeah, I was always crazy fast at completing assignments before, but there was no real freedom to go above and beyond the parameters of each assignment. With animation, though, I was finally free to use code creatively, and she absolutely loved it. Now, when we were programming, she would frequently pull up a chair next to me and ask why I was doing what I was doing, what I was trying to accomplish, and not because she was hounding me to work harder or because she was looking to see if I was doing anything wrong, but because she had a legitimate interest in how I was approaching problems in unique ways. Our relationship had done a complete 180 in a really short amount of time. Now, late 2001, we all know what happened. After 9/11, I was determined to join the military after graduating, and with the exception of Miss Tempest, literally every teacher I had was against me enlisting. I was too smart to join the military. I would be wasting my talents. I would get myself killed. Just about every excuse you can think of, I heard. And it would be several weeks, maybe even months, before my parents would end their opposition towards it. Even my girlfriend at the time broke up with me because of this. Miss Tempest was the first and for a while the only supporter I had in making what would prove to be the most important and best decision I've ever made. Anyway, our first assignment after the terrorist attacks was to create an animation celebrating a holiday. Now, Christmas, of course, is probably the most popular because it's easy, everybody knows the symbols of Christmas. I remember a couple girls, I think, chose Valentine's Day, but filled with patriotic vigor, I decided to create something for Independence Day. Now, it's kind of hard to compare my work to that of the other students 20 years after the fact and without any of the files from back in the day, but to give you an idea of what was expected of us, the best animations, besides mine, were using like floating hearts scrolling from side to side, and a Christmas tree with oversized blinking lights that was animated by flipping itself horizontally in a loop. No, mine was going to be epic. There were going to be marching soldiers and people waving in the streets, a hot girl in the window, and fireworks galore. The background was going to have layers of hills and trees and more houses, and it was going to bring American folk art to life. Now, to be honest, I don't remember this in crazy amounts of detail. I remember that one of the houses in the background had a picket fence, which tells me that I either drew the background at a higher resolution than I drew this one, or the houses were a lot closer to the front. I really wish I had my original files, but they're all kept on a zip disk because this was 2001 and that was the technology of the future, and because those zip disks were so expensive, I didn't get to keep it. And even if I had it, I wouldn't have a zip disk player anymore. But anyway, however different the background looked, I'm quite confident that my sprites are more detailed and better animated here. What I do remember is that I animated the soldiers in the piece so that they were marching from left to right, kind of insinuating that they were going off to war. And I wanted it to be reminiscent of those old World War I propaganda films where a parade kind of forms down the street and able-bodied men just kind of run behind them on a whim and walk together to their local recruiting office. Now, I'm a much better artist now, and I'm sure I would cringe really, really badly if I saw any of it. But compared to what my fellow students were doing, this was absolutely insane. This was such an ambitious undertaking that I was coming in after school for 1 or 2 hours a day to work on it. During this time, Miss Tempest and I had been talking more about politics, religion, and the military. She was not just a teacher at this point, she was a true mentor. You know, looking back on it, I really was blessed to have quite a few good mentors in high school. Unfortunately, while many of my other mentors were pretty much universally respected, Miss Tempest still had the reputation of an iron-fisted tyrant. And maybe she liked that. I mean, when it came to kids screwing around in class, it never happened anywhere near the same level in her classroom as it did anywhere else. And really, could you blame her? She had tens of thousands of dollars of equipment in her room, and 20 or so pubescent idiots hopped up on hormones, thinking they know everything, walking in every hour and a half. Yeah, she ruled with an iron fist and put the fear of God into us, but I don't think I remember anyone who gave a crap getting anything less than a B in her classes. She got results, and she taught us what she said she was going to on day one. Anyway, that December, the school decided to put on some sort of like a secret Santa thing where the students would volunteer to get gifts for the teachers, and the teachers would try to guess who their secret Santa was. And it was the very end of the last day of signups, and I walked into the office. I wasn't going to sign up for this. I knew about it, but I was there to make copies for one of the clubs I was in, and I happened to see the sign up form, and I was like, I wonder who is not picked up yet. You know, what teachers don't have secret Santas yet. I went through there, you know, kind of like laughing at the names. Ha, big surprise. Yeah, that guy's a jerk, you know, that sort of stuff. And then towards the bottom of the list, it's in alphabetical order, I saw Miss Tempest's name. And suddenly I felt like a jerk. Even though this was towards the end of the semester, it was really the first time that I contemplated how radically my views on this teacher had changed from my freshman year. It also got me thinking that behind the jerk facade of some of these other teachers, there was probably a decent person there who, for whatever reason, either lost their passion for teaching or their patience for asshattery. Anyway, I picked up her name. Realizing that my relationship with her was somewhat unique, I decided to approach the Secret Santa thing like a girl. I don't remember any of the gifts that I got her, but they were all based on subtle things that I learned about her this past semester, but always with a girly twist in some way. Finally, they had the Secret Santa reveal party thing, and I was in luck because I was probably like one of only like 3 guys that participated, and those other guys were all picked right away. Plus, I think typing was the one class that almost all the girls in the school took, so she had almost all of these other people in there at some point or another. I was among the last people that were figured out, and she absolutely lost it when she found out it was me. I got a huge hug and tons of questions about how I knew what to get her, and I couldn't help but make a sly remark about whether she was accusing me of cheating by having someone else to do my shopping. Anyway, we had a good laugh about that, and I thanked her for all of her help, especially with supporting my decision to join the military. At this point, my parents were finally coming around to the idea, and she said she was really happy for me and asked me to stay in touch since this was going to be my last semester with her. Anyway, the next semester, my last semester of high school, I spent just about the entire day in the CAD lab on the opposite side of the building and on a different floor from her classroom. And before I knew it, the semester flew by, and eventually I was on my way to Lackland Air Force Base for basic training without really seeing her too much again. Years went by, and I actually pretty much forgot about the class. When I got bored of Minesweeper on military computers, I eventually started drawing little single-frame comics about each knight's mission in MS Paint, and this eventually turned into a webcomic in 2005. In 2007, I stopped the webcomic and began reimagining the entire story as a crazy comic book adventure. Finally, in 2014, I finished the MS Paint comic Volume 1, and late last year at some event I was doing, either late 2018 or early 2019, someone asked me at some event, where did you learn to use MS Paint like that? And suddenly, Miss Tempest's Programming 3 class popped to mind. And I realized, oh man, I have to give her a copy of this. She's gonna flip out. That night I went home and I searched for quite a few hours and I hit a lot of dead ends until finally I found her. Unfortunately, it was in an obituary in a church newsletter. Carol Tempest of Midlothian, Texas had passed away a couple years earlier. This was the third reason why I wanted to recreate this pixel art project for my Programming 3 course, as a tribute to a mentor. I've been beating myself up over this for the past year, and the comments from the Oblivious Marshmallow and Ryan kind of inspired me to create this in honor of her. So, thanks guys, hats off to you. It's also a chance to ask you if you've ever had any mentors like this when you were in school, and if you did, have you kept in contact with them? Because I'd like to know. Leave me a comment and share it with us. I've kept in contact with most of my mentors over the years, which is why I really can't believe I let this happen. If you're not keeping in touch with your mentors, I do really hope this inspires you to reach out to them. So anyways, let's talk about the art here. This recreation is more like a revisiting of a past project, whereas before the soldiers were being drawn as though they were going off to war, which was where I was when I created it, now the soldiers are going from right to left, implying that they're finally coming home. Welcoming them home are several sprites, the kids based on friends of mine from the Air Force, and I'm sure you probably recognize the Mac character if you're a fan. Also, there is a saluting veteran tearing up just a little bit as he remembers those who passed on before him. Although his hair is similar to Kevin's character in the MS Paint comic, it's actually a sprite of the Grandpa Tracy character who we'll meet in the MS Paint comic Volume 2. Loss is actually meant to be a subtle theme of this piece. The soldiers are coming home, the old veteran remembering his fallen friends, the gold star flag calling to mind our real home is with God in heaven, even though we don't all leave at the same time. But while that might suck for us without them, in the background, fireworks are exploding in the sky in celebration and reminding us of our victory through Christ and the knowledge that we'll all be together again if we just have faith. Hence the church and the home in the background. I really like how this turned out, especially the sprites. I specialize in high-resolution pixel art, so the fact that these sprites turned out as well as they did is really a pleasant surprise for me. I expected that to be a complete disaster. Anyway, if you're new to the channel, thanks for watching. I do a variety of art projects like this, but instead of telling you how to create what I'm creating, I prefer to share the motivations and thoughts that inspire my art, with the hope that it might inspire you as well. If that sounds like something you might be interested in, then I hope you consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon to see my future videos. As you might be able to tell, I did cheat a little bit and use Adobe Photoshop and Animate to make this happen. But as much as possible, I try to use the Windows 98 version of MS Paint, just like we did in the class. However, the XP version is my default program for these file types, and they are so identical that I did catch myself a couple times using the XP version of MS Paint. Although I don't really do tutorial videos, if you have any questions about how I did any of this, or anything I do in any of my other videos, please feel free to ask in the comments below. One of the great things about having a small YouTube channel is that I get to interact with my subscribers a lot more personally than a channel with millions of subscribers. But before you ask, to be fair to me, this is my first time using Flash or Animate. I downloaded it just for this project, so I may not be the best person to ask, but I will do what I can. And hey, before you go, on the left is a playlist of my other pixel art time-lapse videos, and on the right is a video that YouTube thinks you'll like based on all their nerdy computer science stuff. Either way, I think you'll have fun. Thanks for watching.